Well, welcome. And yeah, you can guess I'm not from here, right? I don't have that British accent, but I'm part of the family of God and a brother in Christ and grateful to be here. So history of Israel is one of those things I love. I just think it gives us a backdrop that gives us light to understand passages along the way. Because as you think about interpreting God's Word, you think about how you go about doing that, context is always important. You want to understand a passage in its context. And that means the literary context. So in this chapter of this book, you don't just parachute in and ignore what's around it. You want to know the context, because what's before and after it helps you understand the meaning of a given passage. Well, there's also historical, cultural, archaeological context that contributes to our understanding of passages. So this is more of that historical, cultural, archaeological aspect, but still the different parts of the Bible, this passage, that passage, our prophetic book, knowing what's going on in Israel at that time helps inform your understanding of a given passage. That's my objective here. And so when you think about the history of Israel, I do want you to know that, and everybody who comes and teaches here could tell you this is the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, when you think about the history of Israel, volumes have been written on this. I mean, this is a compressed version of a compressed version of a compressed version of notes, right? And so from my seminary notes to the college notes, because I wanted to do it in 2 days, and I prayed already that God would help me not be too rushed to cover my 77 pages in 2 days. But if we hop and skip and jump along the way, I've given you fairly full notes, and you can read what's there. But I just am excited, though, that this provides us a platform that contributes to our understanding of Scripture. When we think about why we should do this, you have your notes there. I'm going to just look at that first paragraph. Some of the things I'm going to read because they're important, other things I'm going to summarize. But notice in an introduction paragraph, among all the nations of the world, Israel is the most prominent throughout the Old Testament. Now, I want you to understand Israel is not the most important to God in the sense of they're more valuable than everybody else. God, in his wisdom, saw fit to work through Abraham, who became the father of Israel, and Israel was the nation through whom he was accomplishing his will. But it's never more important, less important, more valuable, less valuable, because the ground is leveled at the foot of the cross. But Israel has a prominence because God is accomplishing his plan through them. So then we need to understand it. That's one of the reasons why a History of Israel class has value, because God saw fit to work through Israel to be part of the accomplishment of his plan for a long term. From where does the nation come? For what purpose did God bring her into existence? What were his expectations of her? How well did she conform to those demands? So to properly understand the significance of the nation of Israel with regard to God's intentions for the world, which is to bring himself glory and eventually establish his kingdom on earth, to properly understand the significance of the nation of Israel with regard to God's intentions for the world, these and other questions must be answered. So we're not just trying to look at dates and, irrelevant information. Rather, we desire to see God's hand at work in and through his special people. So I have various things here that I say are goals, but I do want you to understand that in addition to the backdrop it provides us, both biblically in the nation of Israel and the larger ancient Near Eastern world, I have under number 3, there's the practical side to the study of Old Testament history. The Apostle Paul in Romans 15:4 wrote, you don't have this in your notes, but for whatever was written in the past was written for our instruction, so that we may have hope through endurance and through the encouragement from the Scriptures. So this information about the past is not just dry, dusty, irrelevant information, but is supposed to provide us encouragement. 1 Corinthians 10:11. Paul wrote, now these things have happened to them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. So these things we're talking about are given for relevant reasons, to help us grasp God better. And, as I think about history, again, I'm a lover of history, so the idea that history is dry, dusty, irrelevant bits of information kind of offends me. But I do want you to know that the history of Israel isn't just simply, facts to put in a file drawer. The history that we study should help us know our God better, value Him, see Him as the great and awesome God of the universe, who has done great things and will do great things today. When I think about Israel, I often think of a quote that a friend of mine who teaches there has said. And in the Old Testament and in the land of Israel, something unique takes place in the Bible, and that is where the divine impacts the mundane. Okay, the mundane is the average run-of-the-mill details of life. And in the Bible, and God's intervention in history is the divine impacting the mundane. Our lives are that mundane world, and you have God's realm, and there's an intersection where God's at work here. So I hope as you think of what we're doing here, again, this isn't just information, it's seeing God at work in the realm of human history. And as we see evidences of God at work in human history, we can be encouraged that the same God promises to work in and through our lives, enabling us to live for His glory. Now, some of the things He did and promised to the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, as part of the theocracy, aren't things we bring across directly. So you're in Britain, right? UK. The British Empire isn't what it used to be, and that's not a failure. It isn't that God promised the UK to be an empire that was around the world. God did promise to the theocracy in the Old Testament that He would protect them against greater enemies if they would trust Him. My point is what God explicitly says in His Word we can rely on, and He can do great things. And there's numerous implications of that, and I hope as we see God at work in these areas, in these events, and these people, that we can be encouraged that we have a great God who does great things, enabling us, and this is what I pray for myself and for people around me quite often, enabling us by His Spirit to be who we couldn't be on our own and to do what we couldn't do on our own. All right, so you have in the notes here, you have some appendix pages I refer to, and these are the things on the screen. And somehow, I'm not sure how we'll do this, Tom, we can give you a PDF of those images if you want them, so you can figure out how to do that logistically. And even if you wanted a PDF of the notes, I'm okay with providing that to them as a resource. So on the first page of the notes, you have these, you have this layout, and I put it up in a timeline here on the screen in the appendix file, and that's just showing you the big picture of how I've presented the development of Israel's history, the patriarchal period, which we'll spend a good part of the morning on. Egypt, Exodus, the sojourn is the next, where God's people moved down under Jacob to the land of Egypt and eventually wander back toward the land of promise. Conquest and Judges, united monarchy, divided monarchy. United monarchy, who are the kings? Saul, David, Solomon. Divided monarchy, a number of kings, exile and restoration. So we'll look at those 6 big items in more detail, and I just give that to you in a timeline form on the screen. So we're going to start with just a little bit of geography, just big picture. And you see this on your notes. I don't have a map. I should have included in the appendix pages, but look at your notes there on page 2. And I want you to see in that map, and again, in the PDF, it'll be color, but what you have on that map is like a rainfall. And so you have shading. Can you all see that? Okay, so the shading shows you kind of rainfall. Up at the top, you think about up at the top of the map, you have the area where there are mountains. So you have mountains to the north. You have what's on the left side, on the west side. You have the Mediterranean Sea, right? What's that kind of dusty looking spot in the middle? Desert. And so because of the circular kind of crescent-shaped perimeter of the mountains to the north, and you have the dusty spot in the middle of the desert, you have this crescent-shaped land that's fertile, profoundly called the Fertile Crescent. And the point is you have south of the mountains, north of the desert, you have this kind of crescent-shaped, circular, half-circle shape swath of land that's livable, that's cultivable, that has the ability to grow crops. You have this Fertile Crescent. Now on the left side, in the west side, you have the land of Canaan, which became the land of promise. And in your notes, that's where we're going to focus our attention, is to the left side, the land of Canaan. It is and I say some things in the notes, how it's the driest and the least fertile section of the Fertile Crescent. It's got some challenges to it. It's rocky, and it's kind of like where I'm from in California, not London, but you have a long dry season, a short rainy season. Water at the right time is really important for crops to grow, and that's Israel. It's where they are. Now, what I want you to think about here, and I'm going to go ahead and go to this map so you can kind of picture it. What I want you to think about here is, I didn't bring my little pointer light thing. Okay, so we have here desert, right? And we have this Fertile Crescent. So what I want you to realize is this land bridge, this is like a land bridge here, where it gets down to about 100 miles wide, a little more than that in some spots. So when you think about what's going on here, what do we have over here? We have the continent of Africa, right? Go ahead and nod your head. You know, as a teacher, when you ask yes/no questions, and all you get is blank stares, it's kind of disheartening. It's like, oh no, they're thinking about the next football game or something, and I'm thinking European football, right? So when you ask a yes/no question, you get blank stares, it's kind of like, oh no. So feel free to nod your head like this. Commit yourself. So I know you're with me, all right? So anyway, so what continent is this? It's Africa, right? There we go. All right, and then we have over here that way is what you're part of, right? Europe. And what's this way? Asia. So really what we have is a land bridge that connects three major continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa. And so if you have any kind of economy, military activity, importance, this little land bridge is that conduit that connects three continents. So you have, because of its location, it's economically important. When you have supply, demand, trade, Egypt has stuff that Babylon doesn't have. Babylon has stuff that Egypt doesn't have. Same with Europe. You have supply and demand. You have the flow of economy, of trade, of commerce, kind of funneled through this land bridge. Why should we care? Well, guess what that means militarily? If you want to be the top dog in the world, if you want to be the major empire of this region of the world, there are certain pieces of real estate you need to control. Are you with me here? Choke points, they call them. So if you want to be in control of the world, there are certain kind of places that are dominating. And guess what one of those places is? The land of Canaan, what became the land of Israel. And so this is going to be a contested place. There are some sites in Israel that are on the international coastal highway, a major trade route, that have like 26 layers of occupation. You know what that means? If there are 26 layers of occupation, you know what happened 26 times? The place was crunched by an attacking army because they wanted that place. So you have this important location where you have economic importance, you have military importance, and we're going to come back to why God put his people there in just a few minutes. So hold that thought for a moment. I want you to think about geographically where the world is. We have Israel on the west end of Mesopotamia over here. This is the ancient Near Eastern world. We have desert, Babylon, Assyria, Medo-Persia. The Hittites are up there, Anatolia, Egypt down here, and Israel is going to be an important place in the operation of world history. So keep that geographical picture in mind. You also have on your page 3, I think it is, and I didn't include that up here. Let's go ahead and look, maybe You can almost see with the fertile crescent this way, this land bridge, but there's an international trade route that comes from Egypt along the coast up here to Damascus and heads over to Babylon. That international coastal highway is part of the importance of the land of Canaan. And on your map on page 3, I show you some of those trade routes. The darker black routes are the more important ones. Can I give you a little commercial here? And this is just meant to be for your help if you're ever interested. When we think about Israel, I think understanding the land of Israel, both here historically, but even visually, is important. I lead 2 Israel trips a year, one in March, one in May. A 10-day trip in March, a 3-week trip in May. My 3-week trip is primarily my students at the seminary, but I have friends in Christ who are diligent students of the Word who want to study, can go on that trip. But the 10-day trip in March, I just let you know that I've had people join me from other places and join us in Tel Aviv. And it's a 10-day trip in March, like March 3rd to the 12th this year. My point is I'm there's no finder's fee I'm getting for getting more people. It's not a contest. It just is to let you know that if you ever wanted to go to Israel, where there'd be teaching that would be Bible-focused, that would agree with what you believe here, that's available. So what I'll do is, if you had that ever cross your mind, contact Tom. He can contact me, and I can send you the web page. About end of September, early October, I really have somebody else help me put it together because I don't know how to do web pages. A web page for the trip. And anyway, there's information available I could make available to you. And just because that's part of that big picture to understand the land of the Bible, land of Israel, be able to see dimensions and sizes and events and cultural issues, archaeological support for what the Bible says. I just toss that out here. All right, so geographical big picture. We have the land of Israel is on the west end of the ancient Near Eastern world. It's a land bridge. Here's the land of Canaan. Here's Syria. This is part of the Bekaa Valley. And then it comes up here and the Fertile Crescent heads down to Babylon. But it has this unique land bridge function that gives it significance. We'll talk about that again in a moment. Any big questions about geography before I move on? Okay, then let's jump into the patriarchal period. We're going to talk about the history of Abraham. Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. It's also, you better watch out. If anybody misbehaves, I'll put your hand out and No, I won't do that. All right, again, we're going to only address certain things here. There's much more we could say. I co-teach an adult Bible fellowship back home, and we're working through the Old Testament. We're in Leviticus now, but we spent a year on Genesis, over a year. And so, obviously, I'm squishing a lot into like an hour or two. So I have, in Abraham, on the next page, I have a timeline I'll look at in a moment, but I want you to think about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And first of all, I want you to think about the fact that God had his people move from Ur over here to the land of Canaan. And they went along the Fertile Crescent and came down to Canaan. And in Genesis 11:31 says, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, Haran's son, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abraham's wife, and they set out together from the Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. When it came to Haran, they settled there for a time, because Terah then eventually died in Haran, and then Abram went on his way to the land of Canaan. Now, I do want you to notice, on the one hand, that Genesis tells us they set out from the Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. I want you to compare that to, sometimes with my Logos program, my fingers hit the wrong button. We also have in Hebrews 11, it tells us that Abraham when they traveled, it says here, verse 8, Hebrews 11:8, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and went out to a place he was going to receive as an inheritance. He went out not knowing where he was going. I just want you to know that's not a contradiction. Genesis 11 says they went out from the land of Ur of the Chaldees to the land of Canaan. Hebrews 11 says they went out not knowing where they were going. Genesis 11 gives us the narrative account after the fact, written by Moses. What happened? Abraham left Ur, went to the land of Canaan. It narrates for us what happened. Hebrews 11 gives us the kind of the more life reality. God said Abraham, who had obviously embraced Yahweh as the one and only true God, revealed himself to Abraham and says, head out of town. Don't know, I'll tell you when to stop. So what did Abraham have to exercise to do that? Faith. And so I think I say here in the notes that why did God call Abraham to leave Ur of the Chaldees? I think one of the things was to test his faith, to see that he would trust his God to do what's good. And even though Genesis tells us what the destination was, that's an after-the-fact narration. But notice I say to shift God's dealings from Mesopotamia to Canaan, from here to there. And I just want to fill in the blanks here a little bit. And this is just trying to connect the dots based on what other passages in Scripture say. Why did God want to shift his dealings from Ur to the land of Canaan? Let me just suggest a couple of big ideas. I think that God helped transition his people from Ur to the land of Canaan to put his people in a place where they would have to trust him. To put his people in a place where they would have to trust him. Now think about it. Land of Canaan. Again, I'm not sure what to liken it to in Europe, but California is a great comparison, and I know that obviously better than you do. Think about a place where you have rain that isn't abundant, and rain comes at certain times, and so you're a farmer, and rain at the wrong time can mess up your crops. No rain does damage too. Rain at the right time is what's going to be necessary for crops to be abundant. So God puts his people in a place where just to produce agriculture, to produce the food they need for life and for commerce, who do they have to depend on? Because he's in charge of the weather, God. And so he puts them in a place where just the weather by itself is an issue of trust. He puts them in a place that has not a lot of topsoil, a lot of rocks. There's a proverb, an old Jewish proverb, that says that God sent an angel with a bag of rocks to distribute throughout the world. And when he went over Israel, the bag broke. And it is a rocky place. There are some valleys that are abundant and deep topsoil, but a lot of it's pretty tough for growing crops. So he put his people just agriculturally at a place where they would have to trust him. And there's some more things to say that I can't for time, but how else would they have to trust him? Remember where they're located? Land bridge between three continents. What's that? You have conquerors. You have mega empires. They're going to want that real estate. And God says, I'm going to put you in this land. I'm going to establish you eventually under Joshua as a nation in the land to represent me before the watching world. And I will make you victorious if you will trust me. So Asa, he goes out and faces an innumerable Egyptian army. And guess what? He won. Now, it wasn't because he kind of flexed his muscles and they ran. It was because a great God intervened. You have Hezekiah, who's attacked by the massive and impressive Assyrian army that already crunched 46 Judean cities, including the impressive city of Lachish, surrounding Jerusalem. I mean, humanly speaking, Hezekiah, we say in America, is toast. You know, he's doomed. Except for a great God who intervenes. So he puts them in a place where they're going to have to trust him, both militarily because God had promised to protect his theocracy, his people, if they would trust him, and agriculturally and other things too. Now, just a little aside here. That's something for us to resonate with and be encouraged by, if you will. You know, if I could vote and have my way, I'd say, Lord, I'm going to trust you. Just keep those hard times out of my life. I promise I'll trust you. But you know what God does? Do you use the word bonehead in the UK? Do you know what that means? Bonehead is an American term for, Obama. You're not thinking right. And so we have a tendency to be boneheads. We have a tendency to go our own way, I got this. I'm able to do this. And the Lord at times introduces things into our life that forces us to trust him. As hard as that is at times, that's the best place to be. I'll tell you, this is another aside I can't pursue. In my mind, humility and dependence on God are two of the most important virtues that we should have in our life. Because those things just trigger all other kinds of realities, spiritual realities. Because the humble man is a dependent man is a humble man, and that's part of a growing walk with the Lord. So he puts his people where they have to trust him, and I'll just encourage you that as life goes by, we're going to have regular opportunities to practice that. And so our response needs to be one of faith. But he put them there. So why did he transition them from Ur to the land of Canaan, to a place where raising crops was tough, where they have a coveted piece of real estate that other nations are going to want to conquer? Because he put them in a place where they would have to trust him to flourish and grow and honor him. Why else? There was a second reason why he made this transition. I think to put his people in a place of international significance. Now, I'm going to explain that for you. I mean, again, you think about in the creation account, he said, "Let us make mankind," I would translate it, "as our image, according to our likeness." I think it's a statement of essence, according to our likeness. We're made in the image of God. We have self-awareness. We have eternal life principle. We have the capacity of a fellowship with God. Those are some of the things that set us apart from the animal world. We're made in his image, according to his image. But when he says, "Let us make mankind as our image," I would suggest that first part is addressing the function God intended for mankind, to demonstrate God's surpassing character to the watching world. From the get-go, from the very beginning of creation, what did God have in mind for creation? For humans, for men and women? To be his image bearers, to demonstrate his character to the watching world. And so when he puts his people to the land of Canaan, he's putting them at the crossroads of international significance. Putting them in a place where there's a juncture of three continents gives them kind of market impact, right? Advertising power. They're in a place where they're in the crossroads, where people are traveling through to get the news out that there's a great God who can transform hearts and accomplish his will in an unparalleled way. And so I think he did that here when he moved them to the land of Canaan. That's part of his agenda that he began in Genesis 1. And this is not a theology class. I'm teaching that next week in Berlin. But the point is other passages pick that idea up. Exodus 19, before he gave them the Mosaic covenant, he said, "If you'll keep my covenant, listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be unto me a treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." All three of those resonate with a representative function. His point is if you live your life in accordance to the Mosaic law, that doesn't save you. It doesn't even make you more spiritual. It enables you to live a life that puts me on display, that represents me. That's a common thread throughout the Bible. And so I want you to realize that when God put his people in the land of Canaan, he put them in a place where they could impact the world where he'd placed them. I don't want you to misunderstand this, though. So let's say, like London, like LA, it's a place of international significance, right? I mean, you have the world just all around you. I think it was Sunday morning. We have a service here at 4. Prof. Essex, who's a colleague of mine and been here numerous times, took me and some others out on a tour. And just throughout that day, I was just surrounded by languages. I mean, half of them I recognized, and half of them I didn't. So, I mean, the world's right there around us here in London, but also just if you're at a crossroads in a number of ways, like LA is, to have that opportunity to impact the world. But I want to let you be rest assured, if you're from like Nicosia, Cyprus, you could be from another part of England that's maybe less on a crossroads. It doesn't mean that everybody has to live in London or LA. The point is the kind of the appropriation point for us is God wants us to lead eternally significant, internationally impacting lives. Now think about it. We can't all go everywhere, but each one of us needs to think, and this is what I pray for my kids, and I try to challenge them with this idea. Like, none of my kids at this point in time have pursued a life of vocational ministry, which I'm okay with. If God hasn't called them and just given them this insatiable desire to live of the ministry, and they can be an accountant or work at the gas company or do something else, do it. But I want you to do it living with the world as your vineyard. That's what I ask my kids. And I'd say that's where we should be. We should want to live with the world as our vineyard. So you have a good job, or you're working a job that's not a good job, but you have a job, and you're living a life, and it's in a part of the world that maybe isn't touching the world. Well, look for ways to impact that world, to be part of, praying for, giving toward, going on short-term trips, living an eternally significant and an internationally impacting life. So what I want you to see here is what God did in moving the land of the people of Israel through Abraham to the land of Canaan matches God's broad agenda theologically. That's who God is. And that's how he wants us to live our lives. He wants us to trust him. He wants us to live lives that impact the world in which he's placed us. What do you know? The Old Testament does have relevance. All right, so let's move on then. On page... My page is a little off because I've been adding some comments. I think it's my page 4. Maybe it's your page 3. I think it's your page 4. Anyway, you have this timeline of the patriarchs. I just want you to notice it. Sometimes we don't get the overlap of the patriarchs. We kind of think that, if you notice here, like, Abraham is alive a ways into Isaac's life. Isaac is alive up to almost 10 years before Jacob died. Close, I mean, it's an estimate. The point when Jacob came back from the land of Padan Aram, and he came back to the land of promise, Isaac is still alive. He thought he was going to die when he did the whole blessing thing, which we'll talk about later. I just want you to see the overlap of these patriarchs. And then the next page is just for your reference, a bunch of chronological dates from the patriarchal period. What I want to do here is summarize some things here. So we have Abraham is coming with Terah and his brothers, and they come up to Haran, which is up here in this area. Stop there for a time. We're not told how long. Terah dies, and Abraham continues. And when he's 75 years old, the text says in Genesis 12:5, they come to the land of Canaan. And then eventually, after a period of time, God's promised them, he promised Abraham, I'm going to make you into a nation. I'm going to give you a land, and I'm going to make you a blessing. And then some famine hits the land, and Abram goes down to Egypt. And is Abraham a perfect guy? I know. He lies about his wife, his half-sister. That'd be another little rabbit trail would be fun to pursue, the whole issue of lying and deceit. But that's not part of the class. So anyway, he goes there and he comes back, and his life is kind of up and down, but he is living in the land of Canaan, and Lot, his nephew, is here with him, and they are animal husbandry guys. They're raising sheep, and they're semi-nomadic, and eventually, as things are going, the land that they have available to them is kind of being hemmed in because Their herds are growing. God is blessing them, and they separate their ways. Lot goes down to the Jordan Valley, which at that time was green and lovely. Abram stays up in the highlands of Judah, and eventually as they separate, Genesis 13, we have in Genesis 14, Lot is captured by the Mesopotamian kings. He's taken on the way out of the area. Abraham goes and gets him, defeats these kings, and ties Melchizedek. Again, I'm just summarizing here. And I want to go on to Genesis 15 for a moment. My pages are off, but it's about page 5. But look for 7a, the ratification of the covenant, Genesis 15. You see in the notes, what page are you on? Canada, what's your first name? There's no page numbers in the bottom? Sorry, page 5, in the notes. You see in the bottom there, there's a little footer? Okay, good. What's your name? Adam? Okay, I said Canada. I just couldn't remember your name, Adam. Because my page is just adding comments. Mine are off a little bit. Now, here's what I want to emphasize. And then I'm going to pause and look at something else for a moment. Because there's some theological points I want to make during the class that relate to this historical development. God had promised Abraham that he would make him into a people, a nation, which involved descendants. He's going to give them a land, a platform on which to conduct their lives, to point people to his greatness, to concrete part of his promise, and to make them a blessing. Well, in Genesis 15, he isn't making another promise, but he's ratifying, if you will, or confirming the covenant he made to Abraham, the promise he made to him in Genesis 12. Because, God is going to make you into a nation, and here's Abraham and Sarah, nobody else, and they're kind of wondering, we need a child to be able to become a nation, tick-tock, tick-tock. So in Genesis 15, Abraham comes up with, if you let me use the term bonehead, I don't know what a good UK term is for this, but bonehead idea number 1, I know how we can do this. I'm going to fix that problem. I'm going to adopt Eliezer, my chief servant, to be my heir. That's how God's going to take care of this and make me into a nation. And the Lord says, no. And look at Genesis 15, and he says, Abraham, let's step outside here, look up to the sky. What do you see? Stars. Count them. Okay, after a few minutes, it's like, I can't. Why? They're without number. I'm going to make you like that, Abraham, my way, not through Eliezer. What I want you to see there, if you look at the end of Genesis 15, God reaffirms it and give him a seed and make him a nation. But I want you to understand what happens in the end of chapter 15 is he does something that sounds kind of grisly. So he has his animals that they kill, and they cut them in two. Half of a pigeon, half of a pigeon. Half of a lamb, half of a lamb. You have these animals that are killed and divided in two. Now, this custom, we see it later on in some cultures, but it isn't like we're introduced to or explained. This is not explained to us, but here's what appears to be the idea. So let's say Adam and I are going to, I'm going to sell him my super valuable stick. And this thing has diamonds and rubies and gold and all kinds of things that make it valuable. And Adam has said he's going to buy this for me for $10,000. Okay, but I don't really totally trust Adam. I don't know him really well. So we're going to do this thing to kind of affirm the strength of his commitment to buy this for $10,000. So we're going to take all these, chipmunks and squirrels and whatever else animals are at hand around us, and we're going to go ahead and cut their bodies in half and put them on the side. And Adam and I will walk arm in arm through those dead animals. And what we're saying is, may the same thing happen to me if I don't keep my part of the bargain. If Adam gives me $10,000 and I say, ha, fooled you, I'm keeping it, or he doesn't end up paying me, we're saying, may the same thing happen to me. And so in Genesis 15, who goes through the animals? God does by himself. Why is it important? God is saying, because he puts Abraham asleep. He is saying, what I promised to you is a unilateral promise. What that means is the hope for fulfillment rests on God's shoulders alone. And so God goes through those animals, and they're burned. They're like a sacrifice. And God is saying, may I cease to exist if I don't keep that promise, to make you a people, to give you a land, and to make you a blessing. Well, that's really important theologically, because he is saying that the fulfillment of these promises rest on my shoulders alone, unilateral. Even though, and there's all kinds of things that I'll pursue next week in Berlin that I can't pursue here. Here's the punchline, if you will, the end of that story, and that is, I'm a firm believer that Christ is going to come and establish his kingdom on earth in a millennium. Why is that? Well, because God has taken that responsibility on his shoulders. Has Israel failed? Sure they have. Did they do a good job in the Old Testament? No, they didn't. But God brings glory to himself by fulfilling his promise in the manner he stated it to be. So it rests on God's character to bring this to pass in a way that shows his glory. And so that ratification is an important truth to keep in mind that relates to his promise to Abraham and to the nation of Israel. Okay, let's move forward. And by the way, there are some things in the notes I'm going to skip. I'm not sure how I got there. I'm going to skip over, just look at them. I do some things geographically here that I'm going to skip over, but just know they're there that show you some unique observations. I'm going to just leave that up there for now. I want you to look in the notes at 9a, the token of the covenant, Genesis 17. He introduces the issue of circumcision. Circumcision is to be a mark that demonstrated the entrance of an Israelite male, boy, into the covenant community. And so a male child who was 8 days old was circumcised, and that was a marker of their being part of God's people. Lots more things to say there. I would say there were other nations that practiced a form of circumcision, very different. Quite often in the Egyptian world, it was later in life, and it involved a different way of doing it. But circumcision has theological significance that God chooses to mark out the men who are the leaders, the directors, if you will, of families. That was to remind them they belong to God. They're part of this covenant kingdom. They ought to live that way as one of his people. And just underneath that section, I want to point out that these different biblical covenants that exist have tokens. Like in the Noahic covenant, the token, if you will, the symbol that points to that covenant is the rainbow. The Abrahamic covenant, circumcision. In the Mosaic covenant, it's Sabbath. In the new covenant, the Lord's Supper, the token, the sign, the symbol that points to this covenant God established in the progressive revelation of his intentions for mankind. Circumcision is anchored in God's intentions to accomplish in and through his covenant nation. I wouldn't bring that across to today as a theological reality. I don't believe in infant baptism. So I wouldn't connect circumcision with baptism. I think it's a bad connection. That's a whole other subject. Okay. I'm going to move on past Sodom and Gomorrah, except to say one thing. Again, if you have questions about something I'm skipping over, I'm not trying to avoid the hard questions, but I'm picking and choosing things to camp on. One of the outcomes of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his family moved to Sodom. Obviously, Lot had compromised in his choices of life. When you and I, if it wasn't for the book of I think it's 2 Peter, we wouldn't know Lot was a believer. You know, everything appears to be that Lot's a spiritual loser, if you will. He wouldn't be in a relationship with God, but the Bible tells us that righteous Lot was vexed. All right, but anyway, they're in Sodom, and God sends an angel to pull them out of there because he's going to judge Sodom and Gomorrah. And just for a backdrop, as they come out of Sodom, and his wife turns around in violation of the angel's instructions and is frozen like salt or stone in judgment, and Lot and his girls go up into the hills, probably in the area of Transjordan, and there the horrible result happened where the girls are, who's gonna give us an heir and marry us, and so they cause their dad to become drunk and have sex with him, and I just want you to know that's the Edomites and the Moabites. That's where they come from. So that's just a connection to realize that the people who are related to Abraham, they're from the nephew Lot, so there are blood relatives. The Moabites and the Ammonites are the result of the follow-on to the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just good to make that connection. Later on, when they come to conquer the land of Canaan, God says, don't bug the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites because they're related to you. Later on in history, after they commit all kinds of treachery against God's people, the Lord speaks judgment against them.